There we go. Let's get started. All right, everybody. Today's session was supposed to be about trading the midday rookie roast range. And on trend days, we don't really have a rookie roast. It's one of the exceptions. And we have a rookie roast, but it's everybody getting beat up. So what I want to do is go through today from the open and as if we had all been together and just how I would have described this to you from the ES point of view. And it's pretty clear what's going on. We have a couple of really learnable examples here. But anyway, so if you look over on the right side of my screen here, I'm going to just kind of pull this out a little at a time to show how it opened and what happened. Let's go back to the session we had yesterday, and we talked about the three types of setups right at the open. The first one's called the Open 5, if you recall. It's a momentum trade. I was asked about this in the pit. Did we have it this morning? We sure did. And, what do you do in a high momentum situation? You make every effort to get with the momentum, either, if it comes back to the other end of the range briefly, or if it just gets so intense that it's clear it's going to keep going. And today we actually had both of those. In ES, we had the fasten your seatbelts and, here we go to the downside. NQ gave a better entry because it faked out a little bit. So I'll show you this now. So here's where we opened, and that it's hard to even catch this. Remember, these are 5-second bars, and so it had already dropped. Get this out of the way. It had already dropped here at, it's been open for 30 seconds here, and it had already dropped from 77 to 75. So, your first instinct when you see that, put this somewhere else. Your first instinct when you see that is, it's right back at this low range. Maybe I should nibble long here. But you need to be careful when there's that aggressive a move and it's still trading on the bid. Remember what I said about that? To bounce, we need to get over on the ask, and the ask needs to get lifted. And clearly that wasn't happening here. So, and let's stretch this out just a bit so we can actually see, that first 5-second bar just had this massive wick. And then the volume just crushed to the downside. And then when it broke that low right there, it picked up again. And see, we're totally trading on the bid here. So, you could have potentially looked for a long here, but it should have been pretty obvious right away that was a bad idea. That you could get run over doing that, because it was going down pretty strongly. And remember, the Open 5 is about which way is it going. How do you know it's trading on the bid? Because this is pink. This is bar by bar delta, and this is trading on the bid or the ask. Right now, everything was on the bid for these bars. You can see that it hadn't traded on the ask at all, and since the open. Okay, and we see that on the domes by is it trading in this pink, or is it trading on the blue? And so in the case of, if you look at this low, there's absorption at the low. What that was showing on the chart we just had up was that it was doing that, but it wasn't getting absorbed. It wasn't stopping. It was just going down and going down and going down. And it was doing that, with a lot of volume. So let me put that chart back up. Where did you go? Yes, 5-second. That's you right there. Okay, so let's kind of keep going here, and you can see it just got uglier and uglier. That just kept happening. At this point, we're down almost 8 points off the open, and again, the aggression is so intense that at this point, it should have been really clear to you that you either want to get short with this, or you want to fasten your seat, or you want to sit on your hands. And if you're going to get short with this, just hit the market. A limit order would be a total waste of time because the bid's getting crushed. So, but you could have also gotten a bad fill and it bounced, but it didn't bounce. So, again, if you saw that as a short, you read it right. It was a clear Open 5 short. Let's see what happened after that. So, little attempt to bounce right around 70. That got nowhere. And look at what this is right here, okay? So we had this high momentum move down, And then we went into ebb and flow. And when I've told you this a lot, and I'll keep telling you, when you see ebb and flow at the edge of a range after a really aggressive move, be very careful fading that. In other words, be very careful trying to get long here, because this is a pause on the way down typically, unless you get a high volume reversal, which would look totally different. It would come down really hard. It would stop and turn and go right back up. This isn't doing that. This is very, very clearly ebb and flow at the low, and the same applies to ebb and flow at the high, only you're going the other way. All right, what happened after this? Ebb and flow, ebb and flow, ebb and flow. Little probe down with a wick. So see now, Waleed, how now there's trading in the ask, so we can see it's getting bought down here at least, but it's not going up. So that's probably people taking profits from the big drop and covering their shorts. That's why ebb and flow at a low is so dangerous to get long into, and ebb and flow at a high is so dangerous to get short into. Okay, so what happened next? A little attempt to bounce. It bounced a point, and it just started to get a little bit of an uptrend move. That's why the color changed. And then, here come the sellers again, and look out below. Okay, so at this point, we've been open about 10 minutes. We're not at the 15-minute yet. You can see it drew the line down there, but we haven't had that much time yet. So look what happened. Again, ebb and flow at the low, only now the low's down here. Tried to bounce, a little bit of a high volume reversal. So again, real quick wick there, but it's just not bouncing enough. I mean, this movement here is just 1.5, 2 points. It's just, and it hasn't gotten through here yet either, which is the previous ebb and flow. So again, really careful. If you were trying to go long here, you were probably looking to get run over. A short at this point maybe is worth the risk. If you understand some more information, it might be helpful, like the internals. It's a little too early for that at this point here though. So we'll let it go and see what happens. Sit on your hands, and then here come the sellers again. See how it's trading on the bid, and the price is dropping. That means the buyers are getting run over by sellers. And it did that a few more times, and then it said, okay, and I'll just kind of scroll out here. It said, okay, right here. Okay, so at this moment, this is right where we got the end of the 15 minutes. So remember, setup number 2 at the open is you're looking for which way is this likely to break? Well, today that was a no-brainer. And the open 15, this setup right here, was the setup of the day. Getting short, if you caught this, great. That was a great high momentum open 5 short. But right here, with this right there, this was a perfect short for a variety of reasons. If you were watching structure, what was happening, that was just a little of the way into the first period, which is right up here, and it was a fairly tight range. So, just watch what happens as we leave this area. And one other thing that was noteworthy here is if you were watching the internals, they opened really negative, and look at the advanced decline. It opened and it got worse as we went into the session, because the tick was just, look at this, minus 1,200. It was down there for a long time. The buyers were just getting crushed, and the equities were getting sold very hard. Again, if you looked at the heat map, it would tell you the same story. Everything is red. There's, little tiny pockets of trying to be green, but, this is a market that's getting sold. Okay, so at this point, you should have been fairly aware of that if you were paying attention. And again, if you were watching the extremes, at that point, we weren't really blowing through, extremes of the VWAP, but we were really close. It had tapped down to SD2, and it was trying desperately to hang on to that. And hold that thought again for a minute, and let's go back to what happened here. So this is when we have all that information we just saw. Obviously, we can't predict the future, but we can see the market's getting sold, and it's having trouble bouncing here, and all the selling down here. And okay, it looks like a decent place to be short for the 15-minute break. And then remember, the 15-minute break trade is a great trade to catch a trend day if we get one, or what's called an opening drive off of this opening range. And sure enough, today again was the 1 in 10 that it happens. And here's what happened. Just ebb and flow, ebb and flow, ebb and flow, ebb and flow, ebb and flow. And then watch when it gets to this level here, okay? That's right there. Okay. That's the place. Even if you didn't short it earlier, right there, you could just say, okay, clearly the 15-minute break is going to be to the downside. The internals suck. You could get short at 67. That was a pretty clear place to play. And anyway, it broke it here, and then it tried to bounce and it couldn't. Tried to bounce again and it couldn't, and then the fun really started. It just said, okay, we're not going to be able to hold that level, and look at all the selling again, and it just kept going. So, it kept making lower lows, the bright red on higher volume. This is where the wave volume is really helpful. Down on 15K, up on 7, down on 10K, up on 2, down on 13, up on 4, down on 5, up on 1. You see the point? It's the downside energy is crushing any attempt to get bought. So at this point, it's really clearly a short, and you're in it or you're not. And that was the best entry right there on the breakdown of that range. And then it just kept going, right? So it got down. It did some ebb and flow at the low. It broke down again. This just kept taking out longs over and over again. And so where are we now? Well, this is where we are now. And it's trying to figure out what it wants to do next. And it's a really dangerous long. It's not a rookie roast range to trade because it's a trend day, and those don't work very well. We want a really quiet day in the middle of the middle to do that. And even though these guys are horizontal, the LRCs, again, it's at the bottom of the range, and that's just a really dangerous spot to play. Okay. Let's look at the exact same thing in NQ, because it was a little different story. It played out the same way, but the open was a lot harder because it didn't just open and dump. Look what happened over there in NQ. It dumped, and then it bounced above where it opened. And, this is classic NQ. It was kind of pricing in what was happening over in ES, and we were well correlated. So, and RTY was leading down. Here I'll put this back for a second. If you look here, RTY has been leading down all day, and actually NQ is the strongest of them. But clearly we have a weak trend in the other indexes and a strong move down that's attempting to bounce again. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But so anyway, this one was a lot harder to play. And if you kind of watch it, it did the same thing ultimately, but it kept doing it with big bounces, see? And then when it finally did break the low, it did the same thing. There's your 15-minute low. And so that's always worth watching ES for your clues. And then, as I've said over and over, I like to trade an NQ just because you get better moves. This one, though, notice how it's much less clear. It kept, making higher highs and then lower lows. It's just, it's harder to read the short term in NQ than it is to read ES. So take your clues from ES, particularly when the market is, reasonably correlated like we are today. Okay, so let me put that guy back. Why is that being there it is. Okay, so let's see. What else do I want to talk about? And you were scalping mostly long. Aha. All right, so you were trying to swarm this, which would have been probably a bad idea also. Again, it's really important. When is the one time where I don't swarm? I don't swarm when the market's trending. I even put that in the pit. Let's go to our pit Scalpathon. And come on, Jeff, there it is. Okay, and that is in there where it's swarming best two setups right here. See, look at the point right there. Do not swarm counter trend in strong trends. Do not ever swarm counter trend at the open 5. So yeah, I know. And again, that's why, Sven. It's not like and don't beat yourself up. Don't say, oh, I'm an idiot. That's why this takes so much practice. Because 1 out of 10 times this will happen, so it's not front and center on your mind. What's front and center on your mind are the 9 out of 10 times your trade would have worked today. And I totally get that. And so you just have to be really mindful. Like, when the internals opens with the tick, it opened right here. The tick was minus 900. It never got above 0 for the first hour. Okay, if you're seeing that, you should be automatically thinking, I'm either going to get short if it makes sense, or I'm not going to trade. That you have to have that as a circuit breaker, because that's just, it's telling you, and also the advanced decline. It opened at minus 1,500, and by the end of the first hour, it was at minus 2,000. The market was telling you what you needed to know. You just, didn't pay attention. And I totally understand. I do it. I still do it. That's particularly like if I have a Lilu bundle, I'll do that with two of them at the open, and then I'll have one of the other ones going the other way, because it's a really tricky environment. So anyway, if you look at what's happened, so here we are again looking at those same views, and you can see once we got going, we rode down on between SD2 and SD3 in NQ. So that was a very extreme move. But again, you never fade trends like this because, it just never bounced. There was no legitimate bouncing. And, ES, same story. It rode down on SD2, wasn't quite as extreme. You can see over here on YM, it also was riding down SD2, and a little bit more aggressive on RTY. It made it to SD3 right there. But notice how then it bounced all the way up to SD1. You know why that is? It's because the volume was so high to the downside here that the VWAP dropped just as hard as the price, which wasn't happening over here and over here. See what I mean? See how steep that drop is? So that kept that on a less extreme level, even though it was dropping by the largest percentage amount. So that's a noteworthy thing to just pay attention to.
And this is how VWAP price doesn't actually revert to VWAP.
No,
the VWAP
exactly.
will move.
That's a perfect example of how the VWAP will just follow the price down all day. So, the whole idea of revert to VWAP is nonsense. By the way, though, today's close, we could see a massive short squeeze. When there's a big trend day down, always look for short squeezes at the close, and that's a great opportunity to be long. But just be careful, because short squeezes can end really fast. If we have a couple of closing sessions scheduled. I'm thinking out loud here as to whether we could do one today.
I was just going to ask if you wanted to maybe switch one to be today instead because of conditions.
Yeah, I just don't. I don't know if I can do that. Yeah, hang on a second. I want to get the calendar, and I just moved it, and I don't remember where I moved it to. It was on my desktop. I probably put it in pictures.
You've got a closing session for the 3rd tomorrow.
Yeah, let me just bring the calendar up so we can look at it. Okay, there it is. So we've got a closing session scheduled tomorrow.
Yep, tomorrow and Friday.
And the reason I put it tomorrow is because it's going to be after FOMC. That'll just be a total party. So I don't want to not do that one. We get FOMC tomorrow. You know what? Here's what we'll do. It might be an ad hoc. If I'm totally feeling energetic at the close, I'll post an announcement and we'll do one. But I'm not going to commit to it yet because, I tend to overcommit. You guys know that if you've been around TRG. It's like, yeah, let's do one. And then by the time we get to Friday, I'll be in the hospital on fluids for exhaustion. So let's play that slow. But I might do it. Anyway, so that's where we are now. And that's why now is such a bad spot to trade. Right now, again, we could start going lower real aggressively. Look at Waleed. Look at all the trading on the bid. See how much pink there is and how little blue there is. The blue is the times it was trading on the ask. In other words, getting bought, and the sell side is just overwhelming here. So I wouldn't be shocked if this closed at the lows. Trend days, by the way, usually close at the extreme of the day or fairly close to it. But if we can get really extreme and really far away from the VWAP, there's a chance it could set up a nice squeeze, and that could get very interesting. If I don't do the live session, here's a quick preview of the setup. Wherever the VWAP is at the moment, like going into the close, if it's 35 or 30 points or more away from the current price, then you have a good potential short squeeze. There's times it's 60 points away, though, and it doesn't squeeze. So the potential's there. Right now, we're trading at 14, and the VWAP is at, call it 40. So it's only 15 points, 20 points. That's just not far enough away. So I doubt we'll get one unless that changes. So that's how you watch for that. It's one of the ways to watch for it. Obviously, if the bid just keeps getting lifted, then there's a short squeeze going on. So that kind of gets us to where we are now. And one thing I like to do when we have this kind of conditions, and you should do it as well, is take a look at the structural view or just, the daily. So where are we? Remember, Monday and other sessions, we've talked over and over again how this is a range-bound market, and at the extremes of the range, you want to pay attention for fades back into the range, and you want to look out for artifacts that it might revisit. Well, guess what? We had a poor week low on the overnight, and we crushed it on the open. We had a bunch of single prints from a couple of days ago. We took them all out and filled them in. So we cleaned up all of those artifacts in the recent range. And again, it should be really clear to you, as volatile as it's been and as much moving around as we've had, all we've really done is work a range. It's pretty clear. So up here, it was a very interesting fade, and we talked about that yesterday. And, these are the artifacts that got cleaned up here and that one right there. And so, could it come down and retest this? Sure. It could even do that today. But in general, when we get these really sharp moves, they tend to form another little range down at the low, unless, we're going to come down and clean up this stuff, which could happen. And so, you have to be really nimble, and you have to really you have to be guess what? You have to be a tabula rasa. You have to just kind of let the market tell you what's going on. And right now it's really unclear. The move down is really clear, but the question now is what's going to happen now? And your guess is as good as mine. I mean, we'll see it happen or not. And I'll get the questions in just a second. We do have a price rejector right now on the low of this period. So basically it got absorbed and exhausted down there. But again, ebb and flow at the low, that doesn't mean much considering we dropped all the way from, way up here. So, and there's still UB up here, by the way. There's unfinished business up there at the high. So who knows? I mean, structure is just kind of contextual, particularly on a trend day like this. It was definitely telling you that the short was there. If you were watching the footprint, it was clear. And what I mean by that, it just kept selling into the bid, and the bid just kept getting crushed. It kept getting pushed down. So, the buyers were getting run over, and you just don't fade that. You need to see the buyers holding the line, and they couldn't. Okay, let's see this question. Trend day could be defined as it rode SD down. No, Alfredo, you're trying to put a arbitrary, pick a time frame and pick a number of bars. That's why I use a trending indicator if I'm trying to measure the trend. That's the one that's on my old Thinkorswim back in the day when I used trends. This is, from 20 years ago, but that's what this thing on the bottom is. It's a trend indicator called RWI, the Random Walk Index. And again, this is shared in the pit. But, when it's really strongly 2 or above, you've got a really strong trend. And, when did it start to show that? Right when it broke the 15-minute low. That was really all you need to pay attention to. Remember what I've said about the 15-minute break, Alfredo. If we're going to get a trend day, if we're going to get an opening drive, and let me define that. That's a market profile term. An opening drive is when we open weak or we open strong and we keep going that way. Okay, and clearly that's what happened today. And I measure it using the first 15 minutes, and clearly it broke to the low. It could never bounce. So the opening drive was to the downside. We had a trend day from right there. And, pick a trend indicator. Any reasonable trend indicator will probably tell you that that was when the trend went down. It did the same thing over here in ES, same thing in here, So I wouldn't look at it as some number of bars on, some random interval. I would just, use a barometer like the opening 15 and just be mindful, if you want to use that Thinkorswim and, or if you want to toss, look at a daily or something, you can kind of do that. But the problem with thinking in trends, I've said this over and over again, is trends are very deceptive. And that's why I look at where are we going right now. And that was real easy to, when we opened, as soon as it took out that that 15-minute, it never looked back. And it was the same story in ES. So that was really, the best indication if you were looking for something like that. But I would not define a trend day, by writing SD. For example, it can be really hard trend down, but as I just showed you in RTY, because the volume was so aggressive, the SDs didn't get nearly as extreme. So that's an example of why you wouldn't do that. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, let's see. What else do we have here? Oh, we have a range now. Remember, I defined the range by the LRCs, and this is horizontal. But again, on a trend day, you just ignore that. It's, the middle of the day trading the range aggressively. That whole idea is the prerequisite for that idea is that we have a well-defined range, and we don't right now. Now, could you be scalping long and short down here based on this short-term range? You could, but again, you're setting yourself up to get run over because the short squeeze takes us to the upside very fast, and renewed selling that's been pretty aggressive all day takes us through the downside pretty fast. So, it's kind of, remember, we think in bets, and how do you game that one? Well, what are the odds? I don't know. So I'm not going to trade it. What else can I say? Okay, cool, Alfredo. Thank you. All right. So I'm trying to think here. If there was other things I wanted to mention with respect to trend days and being aware of conditions. Again, if you just look at the criteria that we decide, that we're trading with, again, I'll bring that document up for review. Time of day, well, it was the open. Direction, it was down. Were there sweeps? Yeah, to the downside, and they were pretty darn aggressive. The liquidity was also following us down, if you were watching that on the way down. Let's see if I can blow up one of these and show you that. This may or may not work. No, it's not. Zoom's not going to let me do that. All right. Anyway, I was trying to blow this guy over here up so you could see the liquidity more in the past, but hey, you know what? I can scroll back here. That'll do it. So it's just hard to see it on this small picture. Here it is. So this is what it was looking like when we were coming down. We would trade to any liquidity and just plow right through it, and then go to the next liquidity and just plow right through it. So that's what it would have looked like with respect to liquidity. And again, what are the characteristics of the recent range? The low is getting crushed, and it continues. That went on. So now, again, it's just a really crappy time of day to be too aggressive, even though, we got a decent little bounce going right now. If the other indexes can get positive, if NQ can get positive, I'd be watching very closely if RTY and YM started to come back too. That would be maybe a decent indication the market was going to squeeze going into the close. Remember, FOMC's tomorrow. The odds of a rally the day before, just really low. Even the odds of the squeeze are really low. And we have NFP on Friday. It's all about the data points from now to Friday and probably Monday. Oh, I know what I want to tell you guys. This really important. I'll mention this tomorrow when we do the FOMC session and tomorrow close. But it's really important to understand that when there's a big news announcement like FOMC or NFP, it takes 3 days for the effect to impact the market and get totally priced in. The first day is the reaction to the news, the announcement or whatever it is, or the number. The second day is the reaction to the reaction. And you often see a reverse of whatever happened reacting to the news or the number. And then the third day is when it truly gets priced in, and you can assume that, any price discovery is over. But the problem this week, and we had this a month ago too, is that FOMC is Wednesday. So we're going to get the reaction on Wednesday. The reaction to the reaction for FOMC will be Thursday. And then the day it would normally revert to value is Friday, but we're going to get an NFP on Friday. So it's going to, again, have to get priced in. So it'll be at least Tuesday before the market has any sign of normalcy and returning to agreed value. So be prepared for that. And we have an ideal calendar to be doing a Scalpathon. There's just so much good stuff happening. But right now, there's nothing good about this price action. So here's what I'm going to do. Well, here's what I'm going to do about that. I'm going to say, you know what? I want to conserve energy, and I want to see if maybe I can do a session at the close today. Why is this doing that to me? Zoom. Anyway, so I think what we're going to do is wrap this up here. There's just no point in watching this action and me blabbering about it. But I really wanted to talk about the open and go through how that played out. And I think that's a valuable substitute for the 45 minutes or so. Actually, it's almost an hour now that we'll have been here. So let's see. Do I think the market will slow in advance of FOMC? Yes, it will, but it won't do that till tomorrow after the initial balance, Calvin. Good question. Tomorrow's open will be very tradable, but then it should settle into a really quiet range until we get FOMC. That's really common. But after a day like today, who knows? You know, it's a lot of that's going to depend, I think, on where today closes, and that remains to be seen, right? Okay, good question. Are there other questions about today or about anything else going on? I will do office hours for a few minutes here if you have any other questions. Otherwise, we'll wrap up. And if there's any way possible I can do a closing session today, I will. Watch for an alert. But if I can't, we have one tomorrow, and we also have the FOMC live session tomorrow. Right before the announcement, 15 minutes before the announcement, we're doing a public session. You guys are, of course, invited. So we'll see how the rest of the day plays out, and I'll let you guys know. Do I look at the VIX? No, I used to, Sebastian, years ago. And the reason I don't anymore is that the idea of the VIX as a measure of volatility is based on the idea that people use options to hedge portfolios. And yes, they do, and funds do. But what's changed is the 0 day till expiration options have totally messed that equation up, in my opinion. I don't think the VIX is relevant anymore. I see people using it, and when I hear their logic, I think they're just plain wrong, and they're just not adapting to a difference. So good question. That I get that one a lot, and it's a typical question. It's a good question. The VIX is a measure of option volume, and that doesn't make any sense when you've got 0 day till expirations, as opposed to the monthlies or the weeklies that the VIX is based on. Okay, you're welcome. Yeah, those are, and by the way, you guys in the Scalpathon, you basically get, access to me for 2 weeks. And every time we have a live session, I will always take questions on the topic of that session or the previous session or any previous session. But times like this, when we have, an event that changes our schedule a little bit, I'm always happy to do an Ask Me Anything. And if I were you, what I would do is keep a little notebook or a little pad, or your iPad or your Remarkable or whatever, and keep a little list of questions. So whenever we have this free time, basically you're getting free coaching. That's kind of included in the fee for the class. What I won't do is take PMs privately from everybody about that stuff. If you want to do that, you either ask in the stream or you ask me when we're during class. Don't send me a private message unless it's truly private, a topic that's private, because, think about it. There's 44 people in class. If everybody just asked me one a week, I'd spend 3 hours answering questions. And I'm just not willing to do that. It's inefficient use of your time and mine. So please ask them here when we're together, or ask them in the pit. And I don't see any new questions. So can we chart internals on Sierra Chart? Yes. You can. You have to subscribe to the data feed that provides them. JVC, can you answer this more in depth? But I know it's very simple. There we go. Carson's got it for you.
Yeah.
It's very, there's in any platform, you can set the internals up. And I just have, kind of a customized view that I use. And look at right now, we're going up, and look at the tick. We have a little short squeeze going right now, and it's pushing the edge of the range. This is exactly why you don't trade the range on a trend day, because you'll get these little baby short squeezes, and then watch. It'll probably go back to zero just as fast as it got up here, the tick. It'll probably, whoever was buying equities maybe was bottom fishing or covering shorts, and watch. So just all of a sudden, those will both go right back down to zero, or we'll get a trend up squeeze going. But at the moment, it looks like it's running out of gas. Yep. See how this is 2 minutes. If I switch to 1 minute, you'll see it's totally slowing down. See, it already went negative on 1 minute. So, yeah, that you got again. That's a cool little way of kind of keeping an eye on what's going on in the equities. But, it's not a trading signal. It's just more information. When I did the recap of the open, remember how I said at the open 5, we couldn't tell what was going on and it was clear to the downside, but NQ was bouncing. And then as soon as we got to the 15-minute view and we could see the internals, then it was really clear. This is a short. So it's a useful piece of context, particularly right at the open at that 15-minute marker. So, okay, let's see. Jeff, this morning Lee mentioned the 4120 that could be litigated and is happening. How do I see that? I agree with Lee. It's a structural level and it's being litigated. What else is there to say about it? I don't, how can I see that? Well, here, hang on. That's what we were just talking about over here. The okay, 4160 was right there, and that was the top of the recent range, and we just plowed right through it. So it was kind of hard to miss there that was happening. And if you looked at the structural view here, you could see when we got to the crunch it up so you can see that spot. That was right up here, and there was a massive negative delta. It got sold, and then we traded below that. So the passives were clearly short. So I'm sure Lee was mentioning that. And then over on my other monitor, I can't bring it over here. It doesn't fit very well. I have the ES session, and that showed it really well. Let me just see if I can show you guys part of it. It just doesn't fit on this screen. I run this vertically, not horizontally, but let's see if we can see it. So, all right. So 60 is like right in here. And again, you could see the passives were up there. It traded through there. It's just kind of hard to get it, so we can see the numbers on this screen. It just doesn't fit. So I apologize for that. If I switch to that monitor, Zoom totally borks our recording, and then it's impossible to read the recording. So that's why I don't just take you guys over to that monitor and show it to you over there. We've learned from our mistakes on that one. See, again, that's something that's so easy to fix, but Zoom probably doesn't have anybody working on that at all. Did I trade the trend today? I'm not sure what you're asking me. Was I short? Sven, is that what you're asking me? Or the open was clearly, I was short at the open 5, and I traded the 15-minute break. But since then, no. I was having a problem with the Apex copier, and that caused one of my evals over at Apex to blow up. So I was just shutting down computers and sending them emails, and I just figured trend days are notoriously hard to trade, even for me, because they suck you into doing the wrong thing. And once you realize how strong the trend is and you join it, at that point you start seeing people taking profits, and then you can get some wicked bounces, and it just can totally disorient you. And I've learned that by experience from, getting crushed on trend days before trying to fade them, particularly when I was practicing swarming with smaller quantities of micros. I learned that a lot. So it's just one of those things where, we're thinking in bets, and it's just not a good enough scenario in the market conditions to take the chance. Lee likes to say this, and I think it's a really good way to think about any day. Every time you put a trade on, it's an opportunity to lose money, not make money. So when the conditions are tricky, particularly when it's a 1 out of 10 set of conditions like a trend day, I just tend to sit on the sidelines. Every now and then I'll get really lucky, get a size, which wasn't today, get a sizable entry on at the open, leave enough of it on that I just catch a wicked winner. That has happened. I mean, I've had days where I made 15, 20 grand, with a block of micros doing that, where it just, we had a 200 or 300 point move, and, I caught most of it. But that's more luck that you happen to execute correctly, and then the break happened soon enough after that you could protect it. And again, today that was all about the 15-minute break. And I was already taking profits at that point, and then I took the short again when it did the break. And I just said, you know what, this is another good guideline to put in your brain. Whenever your platform is giving you a problem, don't trade. That's because it's like you're wearing a blindfold and you're driving. The information you're seeing may not even be correct. So how can you make an accurate decision on it? You can't, is the answer. So the best thing to do is be very conservative, and I was just practicing that. So I was proud of myself for doing that. Let's see, Billy, I don't know if this question has been answered yet. No worries. Is there a study for Sierra Chart to draw the LRCs like with NinjaTrader? There are.
Yes,
and,
it's built in.
And how to set that up is in the pit. Where is that in the TRG templates?
Yeah, you know what? I can. I'll grab it and put it in the Scalpathon.
Yeah, just again, I know people are starting to do things like put stuff on their charts and whatnot. And, that's okay. But again, don't get buried in your platform. You want to be focused on me. But right now it's a little quiet, and it'll be quiet till tomorrow. So yeah, I get it. That's why I posted the link for people that wanted to check out Jigsaw. I get that, but just don't get distracted by it. But yes.
Yep. It's actually kind of a good practice, I find, if I'm able, which hopefully I am, to recognize when conditions just aren't real conducive or whatever. It's a good thing to do to start tinkering with chart books and whatever, because it lets me feel like I'm doing trading adjacent stuff, but I'm not doing anything that's going to put my accounts at risk, but I'm still involved. So
exactly. You're still working. You're getting work done.
Exactly. You're still being a good trader.
That's totally true. I totally agree with that. And I do the same. That's what I've been doing too. I've been doing other stuff on that. So I'm actually shutting Jigsaw down right now. That's why you saw it go away. And I'm going to also do the same with Ninja, so I can restart Apex and see if that is all fixed. So here goes Ninja, and I'm going to kill my data feed over here. I got another PA. I posted, I got another Lilu PA, which I wasn't even trying to get. This is so funny. I'm working primarily on 150s in Lilu, but I keep buying the deals on the bundles on the 50s. And all I do is I'm working in a 150. I've got a couple of them over the line. I've got one that's like at $8,900. And, I didn't want to blow it up today. So we'll finish that one tomorrow, and you guys can see that. And I just copied over to a 50, and the 50 only has a $3,000 profit target. So those just keep getting funded. So I've accumulated like 5 new 50s in the last week, and I wasn't even looking to do it, but that's fine, All right, movie watching, yes, and Formula One replays of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix in Baku. That was a great weekend, and I was really excited to see Checo win again, Sergio Perez. It was good seeing Mr. Max Verstappen be put in his place. For NinjaTrader to use the LRC, do we need the paid version? No, it's built in. And again, I will share all the templates. Oh, okay. I don't want to start doing templates now for NinjaTrader. It's too much.
Yeah, save it for the appropriate time. Yeah.
At the end of the session, I will give you a template, Ryan, that you can just load and it will do it. But don't, pardon my French for a second, don't fuck with it yourself. It's too hard to get it. And again, I really want you guys focused, particularly NinjaTrader can be problematic when you change anything. So please wait. And I promise you, I'll give it to you. I have it. Excuse me. The only thing you need for the Sorry, I'm drinking some water. Getting old is no fun. Okay, so the only thing you need the lifetime version of Ninja for is that bar by bar delta that I was showing you, but you can get that elsewhere, for free from other, if you just join Futures.io, you can find some other versions of that. No, it is not for sissies, but you know what? It's better than the alternative, Calvin. I've learned that after all my near-death experiences. And I'm like a cat. I have literally had at least 9 lives. I mean, my stroke, I was dead that one and a bunch of times. I can't even tell you how many times, like Nicky Lauda, except I haven't been burned, just broken bones. You're the same age as me. Yeah, I figured, I know we had talked before that you were close. Yep, it's a party, and then it ends. So might as well enjoy it while it's a party, right?
You
All
don't have
right,
to go
folks.
home, but you can't stay here.
That's right. Exactly. All right, guys. I have a friend who had an NDE. NDE.
I don't know what that is.
That help me out, Don. I'll have to Google that. That one doesn't ring a bell to me. Oh, near death
Ah,
experience. Okay. I've had at least 8. So, one of
but
the
who's
times,
counting?
yeah, one of the times I crashed on my motorcycle, I went over the bars, over the handlebars at about 70 miles an hour and flew, and I was on a downhill. So as you flying up, the ground is disappearing further and further away from you below because the hill's going down. So, I ended up going over the bars about 3 feet off the ground. And then by the time I hit the ground, I'd been up about maybe 20 feet. And it just totally knocked the wind out of me and broke a lot of bones. I broke ribs, my back, my neck, hands, wrists, you name it. And my buddies came and got me, and this was in the middle of nowhere in the back country of California, and they came and got me, and really good thinking. There was 3 of them. They got on one motorcycle. 2 of them got on one motorcycle and put me in the middle. So because there was just no other way to get me out of there, and the guy in the back held on to the guy in front with me in the middle, and that's how they got me back to where at least an ambulance could try to help. It was by the time they'd called even for like a helicopter, I would have been dead. It was a really bad crash. So did I see the other side? Yes and no. I mean, there's like this bright light thing, but I think that's more neurological than another side. That's in my personal belief. When I had the stroke, I don't remember anything from that, but I talked to people. I didn't know my name. I didn't know who the president was, but I thought I was totally coherent. I mean, it was wild. It started when I was telling my mom directions, and then it just went into gibberish. And I woke up in the hospital 2 days later, and I had apparently been talking to people for 2 days and had no idea what I was talking about. So that's an interesting one. Yeah, the Billy Idol song, exactly. All right, kids, let's get out of here. Tomorrow we might do a close today. I can't promise, but I'll try. Otherwise, tomorrow we have the closing session. We also have the FOMC session just before that, so it will be lots of fun. Join us for that. Again, collect your questions together if you have any. I'm always happy to answer them. Good questions today, so I'm glad to see that. And again, good lesson from the market today. The market's good at giving you life lessons. When things are uncertain, proceed cautiously. That's true in many, many things, isn't it? All right, kids. Thank you, JVC. We'll see you later.
Absolutely. Yep. Catch you later.